Hola everyone! Today we'll discuss Chapter 8, which talks about the test development. I'm Jelly Rose Adolfo. Together with my partner, Adolfo-Labiscase, will talk about things that you should know about test development. Let's go!
What is a test development? A test development is an umbrella term for all that goes into the process of creating a test. So basically, test development is um, the whole process, of the term for the whole process of creating a test. The process of developing a test occurs in five stages. First is the test conceptualization. Second is test construction. Third, test tryout. Fourth, analysis. And fifth is the revision. This will be discussed to you one by one. So let's begin in the first stage, which is the test conceptualization. It is the idea for a test is conceived. So in this stage, the test developer had an idea on what test will he or she develop or create. The development of a new test may be in response to a need to assess mastery in an emerging occupation or profession. For example, new tests may be developed to assess mastery in fields such as high-definition electronics, environmental engineering, and wireless communication. And also, the development of a new test may be in response to a need to assess mastery in an emerging occupation or profession. Just like the analogy with medicine, which is very straightforward. Okay, once nga na sila ma-discover ng new disease, then the medical researchers will attempt to develop a diagnostic test in order to assess its presence or absence, as well as the severity of its manifestations in the body. In recent years, measurement interest related to aspects of the LGBT or lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender experience has increased. The present authors propose that in the interest of comprehensive inclusion, an A should be added to the end of LGBT so that this term is routinely abbreviated as LGBTA. The additional A would acknowledge the existence of asexuality as a sexual orientation or preference. By the way, what is asexuality? It is defined as a sexual orientation characterized by a long-term lack of interest in a sexual relationship with anyone or anything. So, in the page 231 to 232, there's a close-up discussion about creating and validating a test of asexuality. So there are scholars before who were struggling on how to conceptualize asexuality due to the different or diverse opinion of people about it. For some, asexuality is a sexual orientation. However, others view it as a mental health issue, a paraphilia, or worse, a human sexual dysfunction. So kining mga scholars no nga design ani nga project had a hard time on finding a qualified participants. Luckily, they discover the this online organization called AVEN, which stands for Asexuality and Visibility Education Network, with over 120,000 members. But while the convenience of these group members as a recruitment source is obvious, There are also limitations inherent to exclusively recruiting research participants from single online community. For example, asexual individuals who do not belong to even are systematically excluded from such research. It may well it may well be that those unaffiliated asexual individuals differ from even members in significant ways. For example, these individuals may have lived their lives devoid of any sexual attraction, but have never construed themselves to be asexual. On the other hand, persons belonging to even may be a unique group within the asexual population, as they have not only acknowledged their asexuality as an identity, but actively sought out affiliation with other like-minded individuals. So clearly, ang katong mga uh, authors or scholars need gid nila og alternative recruitment procedure kay sa simple nga pag-rely nila sa membership sa event is dito sa credentiality dito pa lang is nanay flawed na ilang study. Why? It is because mahulog siya nga bias, no, kay kanang one-sided lang man sila nga na good kay ma-exclude man nila tong mga uh, asexual pero dili appeal sa ilang sa organization sa event. So in response to this need for a test designed to screen for human asexuality, the asexuality identification scale was developed. So the AIS, or Asexuality Identification Scale, was developed in a series of stages. In stage 1, included development and administration of 8 open-ended questions to asexual individuals. In stage 2, these 111 items were administered to another group of asexual and sexual participants. In stage 3, these 37 items were administered to another group of asexual and sexual participants. Here, the subjects were selected through the same means as in stage 2, but also through websites that host psychological online studies. As in stage 2, the items were analyzed for the purpose of selecting those items that best loaded on the asexual versus the sexual factors. Of the 37 original items subjected to item analysis, 12 items were retained and 25 were discarded. In order to determine the construct validity, psychometric validation on the 12-item AIS was conducted using data from the same participants in stage 3. Known groups validity was established as the AIS total score showed excellent ability to distinguish between asexual and sexual subjects. So in the end of the um, project, sexual and asexual participants significantly differed in their AIS total scores with a large effect size. This suggests that the AIS is a useful tool for identifying asexuality and could be used in future research to identify individuals with a lack of sexual attraction. So um, the scholars believe that respondents need not be self-identified as asexual in order to be selected as asexual on the AIS. Research suggests that the AIS will identify as asexual the individual who exhibits characteristics of a lifelong lack of sexual attraction in the absence of personal distress. Regardless of the stimulus for developing the new test, here are some preliminary questions that a developer must consider in developing a test. The first question would be, what is the test designed to measure? This is a deceptively simple question. Its answer is closely linked to how the test developer defines the construct being measured and how the definition is the same as or different from other tests purporting to measure the same construct. Second, what is the objective of the test? In the service of what goal will the test be employed? In what way or ways is the objective of this test the same as or different from other tests with similar goals? Third, is there a need for this test? Are there any other tests purporting to measure the same thing? In what ways will the new test be better than or different from existing ones? Who will use this test? Is it the students, the educators, people in medical field, or in any other field? Next is, what content will the test cover? Why should it cover this content? Is this the coverage different from the content average of existing tests within the same or similar objectives? How will the test be administered? Is it by individual or by group? And i-insert na po, what is the ideal format of the test? Should it be true or false, essay, multiple choice, or in some other format? And who benefits from an administration of this test? What would the test taker learn, or how might the test taker benefit? And lastly, is there any potential for harm as the result of an administration of this test? What safeguards are built into the recommended testing procedure to prevent any sort of harm to any of the parties involved in the use of these tests? So these are some questions now that they have to consider, because it is very important, because with these questions, ma-evaluate na mismo sa test developer kung para asa ni, kung asa ni kailangan, kinsay needed ni mo take ani nga test, mga inana. Basic lang nga mga questions, pero useful na siya kayo. Pilot work. In the context of test development, terms such as pilot work, pilot study, and pilot research refer in general to the preliminary research surrounding the creation of a prototype of the test. Test items may be pilot studied or piloted to evaluate whether they should be included in the final form of the instrument. Also, in pilot work, the test developer typically attempts to determine how best to measure a targeted construct. The process may entail literature reviews and experimentation, as well as the creation, revision, and deletion of preliminary test items. Is very important since it helps us or the test developers to identify the potential problem areas as well as the deficiencies. And aside from that, it also helps the test developer to become familiar with the procedures of the test that he or she will going to develop.
Tayong tinatawag na pilot work, na kung saan gumagawa tayo ng unang form ng isang test para subukan kung ano ang pwedeng maging laman ng isang test. Para siyang rough draft ng mismong test development. Gagawa ng test items, susubukan sa isang maliit na grupo ng test takers, tapos titignan if tama ba yung format ng questions at ng scoring. Ang mga standardized commercial test ay required na magkaroon ng pilot study. Para sa mga test na gagamitin lang sa mas maliliit na setting katulad ng classroom, hindi naman ito required.
So, dinhin na ta sa second stage of the process of test development, which is the test construction. A test construction, it is the stage in the process of test development that entails writing test items or rewriting or revising existing items, as well as formatting items, settings, and setting scoring rules. So basically, this is a kind of stage wherein the test developer is designing and building a test. Scaling. It is defined as the process of setting rules for assigning numbers in measurement. The process by which a measuring device is designed and calibrated, and by which numbers or other indices, scale values, are assigned to different amounts of the trait, attribute, or characteristic being measured. So the types of scales, in common parlance, scales are instruments used to measure something, such as weight. However, in psychometrics context, scales may also be conceived of as instruments used to measure, like trait, state, or an ability. When we think of types of scales, we think of the different ways that scales can be categorized. We saw that scales can be meaningfully categorized along a continuum of level of measurement and be referred to as nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. Since, diba, first year pa lang ta, mo na ni siya ang common yun nga na-introduce sa ato nga mga scales, which is the level of measurement. But we might also characterize scales in other ways, which will be presented in the next slide. So there are 7 types of scaling, and these are age-based scale, graded-based scale, Stanine scale, rating scale, comparative scale, categorical scaling, and lastly, the Gutman scale. So let's start with age-based scale. If the test taker's test performance as a function of age is of critical interest, then that is age-based scale. While the grade-based scale, if the test taker's test performance as a function of grade is of critical interest. The Stanine scale, if all raw scores on the test are to be transformed into scores that can range from 1 to 9. Therefore, dira nakuha ang word na Stanine. For instance, a Stanine score of 1 2 or 3 is below average. 4, 5, or 6 is average, and 7, 8 to 9 is the above average. So, let's just say for example, nadi uban yung mga college universities na nagagamit og Stanine scale when it comes to their admission test. So, ang katong mga students nga nabilang sa 1 to 3 below average, there's this kanang baba ilang chance na pasok sa scores ilang gusto kwaon or makasulod sa university nga gusto nila nga applyan. 4, 5, 6 average, murag na siya chance. Labaw na ang 7, 8, or 9, which is above average. Kana sila pa. there's a possibility yun nga makasulod sila sa university, or makapasa sila sa admission test. So, muna siya ang standing scale. Ang rating scale, it can be used to record judgments of oneself, others' experiences, or objects, and they can take several forms. Kaning there is experiences, like say for example, namo sa restaurant and a crew asked you to rate their restaurant from 1 to 5, which is very good to very poor when it comes in service, cleanliness, or quality of food. So, generate mo from 1 to 5. Like 5 ang highest and 1 is the lowest. And then, the comparative scaling. It entails judgments of a stimulus in comparison with every other stimulus on this scale. So, basically, from its word itself, comparative, kina-compare. Like, let's just say, for example, when it comes to soft drinks, ang pinakaganahan kay na akong soft drinks is Mountain Dew. Then, ang dili kinaganahan is RC. Ana gani ka gina-compare nimo ba nga sunod na ko nga gusto sa Mountain Dew is Coca-Cola, kay mas okay pud iyang lasa ingana. Third is sa pa ba orange kanang royal. Yana. So, basically, gina-compare nimo sila, no? Yana. Mo na siya ang comparative scaling. Then, the categorical scaling, a scaling system that relies on sorting. So, basically, nakakategorize siya. Like, let's say, for example, you were asked, what do you feel after watching the tragic movie? So, this pain scale, nakakategorize na siya. So, mamili ka kung asa ka na-fall or asa ka na-belong. Like, dito ba, ang imhabang, ikaw ba ay nasa no pain, hurts a little more, hurts even more, hurts a whole lot, or hurts worse. So, nga na siya kanang categorize. Another example in psychological context is the types of personality. Like, for example, the ambivert, the extrovert, the introvert. So, dito, mamili ka kung asa ka na-fall, kung asa ka na-belong among the 3 personality types. So next is the Gutman scale. It yields ordinal level measures. Items on its range sequentially from weaker to stronger expressions of the attitude, belief, or feeling is being measured. A feature of Gutman's scale is that all respondents who agree with the stronger statements of the attitude will also agree with the milder ones. So, for example, a series of what do you call this one? A series of items could be: I am willing to be near ice cream. I am willing to smell ice cream. I am willing to eat ice cream, and I love to eat ice cream. So, in that, nag-agree ka sa, nagsugod siya sa weaker to stronger expressions. So, ana ang characteristics sa um, sa Gottman scale, you have to agree also. If you will agree to the stronger statement, you will also agree with the milder statements. The Gottman scales are developed through the administration of a number of items to a target group. The resulting data are then analyzed by the means of scalogram analysis. It is an item analysis procedure and approach to test development that involves a graphic mapping of a test taker's responses. The objective for the developer of a measure of attitudes is to obtain an arrangement of items wherein endorsement of one item automatically connotes of attitudes. So, Gottman scaling or scalogram analysis appeals to test developers in consumer psychology, where an objective may be to learn if a consumer who will purchase one product will purchase another product. Writing items. The grand scheme of test construction considerations related to the actual writing of the test items go hand in hand with scaling considerations. The prospective test developer or item writer immediately face three questions related to the test blueprint, and these are: what range of content should the items cover? Which of the many different types of item formats should be employed? How many items should be written in total and for each content area covered? So, when devising a standardized test using a multiple choice format, it is usually advisable that the first draft contain approximately twice the number of the items that the final version of the test will contain. An item pool, it is the reservoir or well from which items will or will not be drawn for the final version of the test. A comprehensive sampling provides a basis for content validity of the final version of the test. It is because approximately half of these items will be eliminated from the test final version. Test developer needs to ensure that the final version also contains items that adequately sample the domain. So how does one develop items, I mean, how does one develop items for the item pool? The test developer may write a large number of items from personal experience or academic acquaintance with the subject matter. Help may also sought from others, including experts. For psychological context, tests designed to be used in clinical settings, clinicians, patients, the patient's family member, clinical staff, and others may be interviewed for insights that could assist in item writing. Variables such as the form, plan, structure, arrangement, layout of individual test items are collectively referred to as item format. There are two types of item format. Selected response format requires test taker to select a response from a set of alternative responses, while the constructed response format requires the test takers to supply or to create the correct answer, not merely to select it. So these are the examples of selected response item format. So we have three types: the multiple choice, matching item, binary choice. So sa multiple choice, it has three elements: the stem, a correct alternative or option, and several incorrect alternatives or options, variously referred to as a distractors or foils. So multiple choice, very familiar kay gina-apply niya siya every exam sa ato. So ang kaning sa multiple choice naa siya correct na answer, naapod siya answer choices nga closely related sa answer, and the uh, the incorrect alternative options or the distractors. Next is the matching item. In matching item, the test taker is presented with two columns, premises on the left and responses on the right. The test taker's task is to determine which response is best associated with which premise. So, ang kaning diri sa again sa left is the premise and responses on the right. So, for the young test takers like preschool, primary school, the instructions will direct them to draw a line. Like, simple lang nga pag draw a line sa corresponding item. Then, the binary choice item. Perhaps the most familiar binary choice item, mao ni siya ang true or false, wherein it is the type of selected response item that usually takes the form of a sentence that requires the test taker to indicate whether the statement is or is not a fact. Other varieties of binary choice items includes sentences to which the test taker responds with one or two responses like agree or disagree, yes or no, right or wrong, or fact or opinion. So these are the examples of constructed response format. Again, constructed response format wherein the test taker will be the one to supply or create the answer. So the first example is the completion item, wherein it requires the test taker to provide a word or phrase that completes a sentence. Like for example, can fill in the blanks. Nga na. It says in here that a good completion item should be worded so that the correct answer is specific. Completion items that can be correctly answered in many ways lead to scoring problems. So, ginaingon diri nga ang sa completion item, dapat kay specific jud siya ang statement para ato nga word kay namang uban nga kanang one word ay kana ganing one word pero daghan og mga meaning, ana good multiple meanings, so dapat specific jud siya. And a completion item may also be referred to as a short answer item. It is desirable for completion or short answer items to be written clearly enough that the test taker can respond succinctly, that is, with a short answer. There are no hard and fast rules for how short an answer must be to be considered a short answer. A word, term, sentence, or a paragraph may qualify. And then the third one is the essay item. As a test item that requires the test taker to respond to a question by writing a composition, typically one that demonstrates recall of facts, understanding, analysis, and or interpretation. So here provided in the table are some of the advantages and disadvantages of various items format. For example, sa multiple choice, can sample a great, ang advantage niya is, can sample a great deal of content in a relatively short time. Ang iyahang disadvantage is that it does not allow for expression of original or creative thought. Like sa multiple choice, disadvantage niya is great deal of content. However, ang sa disadvantages niya is dili siya maka-allow og express no og any creative thought. Like unlike sa essay nga open-ended jud, and the test taker will be able to express their ideas and thoughts. So the rest is pwede na nga kamo na mabasa since it is very understandable naman. So yeah. Writing items for computer administration. A number of widely available computer programs are designed to facilitate the construction of tests as well as their administration, scoring, and interpretation. These programs typically make use of two advantages of the digital media: the ability to store items in an item bank and the ability to individualize testing through a technique called item branching. So let's talk about the item bank first. Item bank is a relatively large and easily accessible collection of test questions. Instructors who regularly teach a particular course sometimes create their own item bank of questions that they have found to be useful on examinations. One of the many potential advantages of an item bank is the accessibility to a large number of test items, conveniently classified by subject area, item statistics, or other variables, and just as funds may be added to or withdrawn from a more traditional bank. So items may be added to, withdrawn from, and even modified in an item bank. The computerized adaptive testing, or the CAT. It is an interactive computer administered test-taking process wherein items presented to the test taker are based in part on the test taker's performance on previous items. So the test might begin with some sample practice items. However, the computer may not permit test taker, like pareha atong sa item branching, nga dili mo proceed og another item if dili niya malagpasan ang two consecutive item nga tama. Ang diri sa CAT is the computer may not permit the test taker to continue with the test until the practice items have been responded to in a satisfactory manner and the test taker has demonstrated an understanding of the test procedure. The scoring items. Many different test scoring models have been devised. So there are three types: the cumulative scoring, class scoring or category scoring, and ipsative scoring. So sa cumulative scoring, the higher the score on the test, the higher the test taker is on the ability, trait, or other characteristics that the test purports to measure. For each test taker responds to targeted items made in particular way, the test taker earns cumulative credit with regard to a particular construct. Next is the class scoring or category scoring, wherein the test taker responses earn credit toward placement on a particular class or category with other test takers, whose pattern of responses is presumably similar in some way. Then lastly is the epsative scoring, comparing a test taker's score on one scale within a test to another scale within that same test. The third stage of test development is the test tryout. Having created a pool of items from which the final version of the test will be developed, the test developer will try out the test. The test should be tried out on people who are similar in critical respects to the people for whom the test was designed. For example, if a test is designed to aid in decisions regarding the selection of corporate employees with management potential at a certain level, then it would be appropriate to try out the test on corporate employees at the targeted level. The test tryout should be executed under conditions as identical as possible to the conditions under which the standardized test will be administered. All instructions and everything from the time limits allotted for completing the test to the atmosphere at the test site should be as similar as possible. What is a good item? A good item, a good test item is reliable and valid. It also helps to discriminate test takers. That is, a good test item is one that is answered correctly by high scorers on the test as a whole. Certainly, in the context of academic achievement testing, an item that is answered incorrectly by scorers on the test as a whole is probably not a good item. Conversely, a good test item is one that is answered incorrectly by low scorers on the test as a whole. By the way, it is also the case that an item that is answered correctly by low scorers on the test as a whole may not be a good item. So how does a test developer identify good items? After the first draft of the test has been administered to a representative group of examinees, the test developer analyzes test scores and responds to individual items. The fourth process of the test development is the item analysis, a general term to describe various procedures, usually statistical, designed to explore how individual test items work as compared to other items in the test and in the context of the whole test, contrast with qualitative item analysis. In addition, item analysis is a statistical procedure used to analyze items may become quite complex and our treatment this subject should be viewed as only introductory. Below are some of the tools that might be employed in this stage. These are the index of the item's difficulty, index of the item's reliability, index of the item's validity, and index of items discrimination. The first one is the index of the item's difficulty. An index of an item's difficulty is obtained by calculating the proportion of the total number of test takers who answered the item correctly. A lower italic P is used to denote item difficulty, and a subscript refer to the item number. P1 is read as item difficulty index for item 1. So the value of an item difficulty index can theoretically range from 0 if no one got the item right to 1 if everyone got the item right. So let's proceed to the next slide. So here's an example. If 50 of the 100 examinees answered item 2 correctly, then the item difficulty index for this item would be equal to 50 divided by 100 is equal to zero point 0.5. So therefore, the item difficulty index for item 2 is equals to zero point 0.5. Then another example is that if 75 of the examinees got item 3 right, then the item difficulty index for item 1 is equal to 0.75. So, same process lang gihapon. 75 divided by 100, then that would be equal to 0.75. So we could say that item 3 was easier than item 2. And note that the larger the item difficulty index, the easier the item. It is because P refers to the percent of people passing an item. So the higher the P for an item, the easier the item. The next one would be the item reliability index. It provides an indication of the internal consistency of a test. The higher this index, the greater the test's internal consistency. This index is equal to the product of the item score, standard deviation, S, and the correlation R between the item score and the total test score. In addition, a statistical tool useful in determining whether items on a test appear to be measuring the same things is the factor analysis. Through the judicious use of factor analysis, items that do not load on the factor that they were written to tap, or items that do not appear to be measuring what they were designed to measure, can be revised or eliminated. The third tool is the item validity index. It is a statistic designed to provide an indication of the degree to which a test is measuring what it purports to measure. The higher the item validity index, the greater the test criterion related validity. So the item validity index can be calculated with two statistics. These are the item score standard deviation, the correlation between the item score and the criterion score. So as you can see in the picture, the item score standard deviation of item 1 is denoted by the symbol S1, which can be calculated using the index of the item's difficulty, or the P1, in the following formula. In calculating the item validity index will be important when the developer's goal is to maximize the criterion related validity for the test. So that ends my report, and Miss Archie will be the one to discuss the rest of the topics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Miss Jelly, for the part 1 in chapter 8, test development. Okay, for the continuation to item analysis, which is a different types of statistical scrutiny that the test data can potentially undergo at this point. And among the tools test developers might employ to analyze and select items are yung kanina na discuss, an index of the item's difficulty, items of reliability, and also the
validity. So here is the continuation. The fourth one is the index of items discrimination that I have to discuss right now. But before I forget, here are the following topics that I have to discuss, which are the first is the item analysis, the test revision, and the instructor made test for in-class use. For the continuation to item analysis, which is the fourth one, the item discrimination index, which indicate how adequately an item separates or discriminates between high-low scorers on an inter-test. So in this context, for example, in a multiple choice item on an achievement test is a good item if most of the high scorers answer correctly and most of the low scorers answer incorrectly. If most of the high scorers fail in a particular item, this test taker may be making an alternative interpretation of a response intended to serve as a distractor. And this also symbolized by a lowercase italic d. It compares performance on a particular item with performance in the upper and lower regions of a distribution of continuous test scores. And it has a formula that D for discrimination index, the U there is the number of correct answer in high group, the L number of correct answer in low group, and we have to multiply those on by 2 and divided by the n, which is the for the total number of students in both groups. And the higher the value of D it is, the greater the number of high scorers answering the item correctly. And a negative D value in a particular item is a red flag because it indicates that low scoring examiners are more likely to answer the item correctly than high scoring and examiners. And this situation calls for some action such as revising or eliminating those items. It is also important to analyze student individual results in their exam, which to uphold test effectiveness and fairness, and there it goes, the analysis of item alternatives. This has no formulas or statistics are necessary here. By charting the numbers of test takers in the upper and lower groups who choose each alternative, the test developer can get an idea of the effectiveness of a distractor by means of an example of the simple eyeball test. To illustrate, let's analyze responses to 5 items on a hypothetical test, assuming that there were 32 scores in the upper level or U and of the distribution and for 32 scores in the lower level or L of the distribution. And the diamond there is that it is the correct alternatives. Example is the multiple choice. For the item number 1, this analysis of item alternatives is a good item. So why? The response pattern to item number 1 is it indicates that an item is really good one. More upper group members than lower group members answered the item correctly, and each of the indicators attracted some test taker. For the item number 2 naman, it is sign of to get improved, more improvement. So why? Because the large number of members for the U group or the upper group, though choose a particular distractor choice in the case of letter B. This item could probably be improved upon revision, preferably one made after an interview with some or all of the upper students who choose B. So for the item number 3, it indicates a most desirable pattern of test taker response, which is this is a very good item. And because all of the members of the upper group answered the item correctly, and each distractor attracted one or more members of the lower group. And also for the item number 4, this is more difficult than item number 3. It just looked like an item number 1 because it is a good item also. Still, this provides useful information because it effectively discriminates higher scoring from a lower scoring examiners. So there, for some reason, one of the alternatives, the letter E there, was particularly effective, perhaps too effective, as a distractor to students in a low-scoring group. The test developer may wish to furthermore explore why this was in the case. And for the item number 5, it is a poor item. Know why? Because more lower group members than upper group members answered the item correctly. Furthermore, none of the examiners choose the B or C distractors. For the item characteristics curve or ICCs can play a big role in decision about which item are working well and which item are not. So recall that an item on a characteristic curve is a graphic representation of item difficulty and discrimination. Let's see, for example, the item number 1 there, in which it is a probability of correct response. Do you think that this is a good item? The answer is that it is not. The probability of the test takers responding correctly is high for test taker of low ability and low test takers of high ability. And what about the item B? Again, the answer is no. The curve tells us that test takers of moderate ability have the highest probability of answering this item correctly. Test takers with the greatest amount of ability as well as their counterparts at the other end of the ability spectrum are unlikely to respond correctly to this item. Item B may be one of those items to which people who know too much or think too much are likely to respond it incorrectly. For the item number C, it is a good test item because the probability of responding correctly to it increases the ability and increases with ability from low to high. So, natunanan ang isa ka student. What about the item number letter B? Its ICC profiles an item that discriminates at only one point on the continuum of ability. The probability is great that all test takers at or above this point will respond correctly to the item, and the probability of an incorrect response is great for test takers who fall below the particular point in ability. For other considerations in item analysis, we have guessing, item fairness, bias test item, and also speed test item analysis. For guessing, one that has eluded any universally acceptable solution. For example, in a classroom setting, when a student guesses at the answer on an achievement test, the guess is not typically made on a totally random basis, in which it is more reasonable to assume that the student guess is based on his or her some knowledge of the subject matter and the ability to rule out one or more of the distractor alternatives. Like, okay, mas malayo si A, B, at saka si D. So, I guess, I will answer the letter C. Pero ito ay malayo sa tinatawag na pintot-pintot. Because any correction for guessing may seriously underestimate or overestimate the effects of guessing for lucky and unlucky test takers. For the item fairness, refers to the degree, if any, a test item is biased. Biased test item is an item that favors one particular group of examinees in relation to another when differences in group ability are controlled. For example, in yung kanina, yung item characteristic curves. The item characteristic curves can be used to identify biased items. Specific items are identified as biased in a statistical sense if they exhibit differential item functioning. So, what is the differential item functioning? It is an exemplified by different shapes of item characteristic curves for different groups. Let's say men and women, that they do not differ in total test score, pero if an item is to be considered fair to different groups of test takers, the item characteristic curves for the different groups should not be significantly different. So that could be the signal na, okay, i-revise natin yung test na to. O di kaya mag-eliminate tayo sa test item na incorrect yung answer nila. For the speed test item analysis naman, is a test taken under speed conditions yield misleading or uninterpretable results. The closer an item is to the end of the test, the more difficult it may appear to be. It is because test takers simply may not get the items near the end of the test before time is run out. So, dali-dali na ito. For the next is the qualitative item analysis. It has qualitative methods, think aloud, expert panels, and also the sensitivity review. Qualitative item analysis is a general term for various non-statistical procedures designed to explore how individual test items work. So we have qualitative methods. Qualitative methods are techniques of data generation and analysis that rely primarily on verbal rather than mathematical or statistical procedures. So, alam naman natin to, di ba? And then, this data may be used by test developers, users, and publishers to improve various aspects of the test. And also, according to the book that Cohen et al. Proposed the use of Think Aloud test administration as a qualitative research tool design that defined as an innovative approach to cognitive assessment entails having respondents verbalize thoughts as they occur. It is it is a one-to-one basis with the examiner. Examiners are asked to take a test thinking aloud as they respond to each item. For example, the test is designed to measure the achievement test, such as verbalization may be used in assessing not only in a certain student sa mga low, high mga scores nila in a previous examinations nila are misinterpreting a particular item, but also why and how they are misinterpreting those items. The other example is that if the test was measured on a personality test or some aspect of it, the think aloud technique may yield valuable insights regarding the way the student or the individual perceived, interpret, and respond to those items. For the expert panels, in addition to interviewing test takers individually or in group, expert panels may also provide a qualitative analysis of test items. A sensitivity review is a study of test items typically conducted during the test development process, in which items are examined for fairness to all prospective test takers and for the presence of baka merong mga offensive language doon or stereotype or situation. For example, in an effort to the root out of the possible bias in Stanford Achievement Test series, the test publisher formed an advisory panel of 12 minority group members, each a prominent member of the educational community. Diba sensitive din naman yung story, yung works ng Stanford Achievement Test. So that is the other example for the sensitivity review. Okay, Welcome to the Everyday Psychometrics that talks about how adopting tools of psychological assessment for use with the specific cultural groups. So, imagine that cultural misunderstanding that may arise when an ancestor with a Western perspective, which is a Caucasian Westerner, evaluates someone from a non-Western culture, just like Austrian indigenous culture that is commonly referred to in Austrian and as well of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And at this case point, they are being evaluated about depression. For non-Western, the indigenous one, health is viewed in a holistic context which encompasses not only mental and physical aspects, but also cultural and spiritual aspect as well. Ill health is often conceived of as a disruption of these interrelated domains. Also, the shyness is common in the indigenous and Australian population because that shyness during the mental status examination or other evaluation may manifest itself by avoidance of eye contact with the examiner to the Western one, which is in turn to be may be misinterpreted by the examiner as a pathological or otherwise suspect some behavior na iba. Baka iba din yung mga pinaplano ng mga indigenous nito, parang ganun ba? So, another potentially misleading sign is that the respondents delayed answer and only minimal speech lang yung pag-answer nila. So, syempre, culturally naman, they are frequently reserved with it and seemingly indifferent too. So, that's the reason why Caucasian clinicians questioning in his or her mind about in a one-on-one assessment situation that patients who exhibit a blank or unrecreative expression may come alive when a family member joins the interview. So, in that case, the clinical experience has suggested that when they interview, they have to involve both family or also the social yearning. And here it comes the some approach and interviewing tool. In developing a mental health screening tool for the use of with the members of the Aboriginal culture, a group of clinicians and academic psychiatrists from metropolitan and rural areas of Western Australia and the Northern Territory employed that yearning approach. This is loosely defined that yearning approach is an interview strategy characterized by conducive to interviewers conversationally telling their own stories in their own ways. While the interview tool, called the Here and Now Aboriginal Assessment or HANA, this allows for traditional storytelling styles that involves both family and social yearning that this screening instrument, the HANA, its aim was to assist in the determination of when a person should be referred to a mental health professional or further assessment. It also provides some narrative responses to be recorded, which can be helpful in the moment as well as in the future when it comes to further discussion of yearning and about the specific nature of a client's presenting a problem. So we have a word of the day, which is anhedonia, which is this is inability to experience happiness. It may be explored by asking questions of a examiner, such as, "Have you lost interest in things that you used to like doing?" This engagement in culturally appropriate activities such as fishing or going out of the bush, and reports of a weak spirit. For example, the respondent may ask some questions like, "Do you have a weak spirit all day or every day? And what time of the day does the spirit feels the most weak?" On the basis of qualitative information from an expert panel or test takers themselves, a developer or test user may elect to modify or revise the test. So welcome to the test revision. Test revision is the context of modifying an existing test to create a new edition. In this sense, revision naman is typically involves rewarding items, deleting items, or creating new items. There are two aspects of test revision. Note that there is another meaning of test revision beyond the associated with the stage in the development of a new test. Test revision as a stage in new test development. There are probably as many ways on approaching test revision as there are test developers. One approach is to characterize each item according to its strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes may be highly reliable but lack criterion validity, whereas other items may be purely unbiased but too easy. The test developer comes out of their revision stage with a better test. For example, very difficult items have a restricted range. All or most all test takers get them wrong. So that such item will tend to lack reliability and validity because of the restricted ranges. And the same can be said of very easy items. The next step is to administer the revised test under standardized condition to a second appropriate sample of examinees. Test developers may find that they must balance various strengths and weaknesses across items. For example, if many otherwise good items tend to be somewhat easy, the test developer may purposefully include some more difficult items even if they have the other problems. Those more difficult items may be specifically targeted for rewriting para mas easy siya. And then, once the test items have been finalized, professional test development procedures dictate that conclusions about the test validity await across validations of findings. And the poor items can be eliminated in favor of those who were shown on the test tryout to be good items. Even when working with a large item pool, the revising test developer must be aware of the domain the test should sample. For example, for the aspect of domain, it may be difficult one or and indiscriminate deletion of a poorly functioning items could cause those aspects of the domain to remain untested siya. So, we'll discuss across validation shortly. For now, let's briefly consider some of the issues surrounding the development of a new edition of an existing test. For the test revision, in the life cycle of an existing test, the American Psychological Association offered the general suggestions that an existing test be kept in its present form as long as it will remain useful, but that should be revised when significant changes in the domain were presented or new conditions of test use and interpretation make the test inappropriate for its intended use. For example, as we will see when we study projective techniques in chapter 12, the Rorschach ink blot test seems to have held up quiet well over the years. By contrast, the stimulus materials for another projective techniques, which is the thematic apperception test, which is TAT, are showing their age. There comes time in life that most of the tests when the test will be revised in some ways or its publication will be discounted na siya. Practically speaking, many tests are deemed to be due for revision when any of the following conditions exist. Stimulus materials look dated and current test takers can't relate to them. Second, the verbal content of the test, including the administration instructions, and the test items contains dated vocabulary that is not readily understood by current test takers. And three, as popular culture changes and the words take on new meanings, so there are certain words or expression in the test items may be perceived that inappropriate sa kanila or even offensive sa iba. Then, the test norms are no longer adequate as a result of the group members changes in the population of potential test takers. 5. The test norms are no longer adequate as a result of age-related shifts in the ability measured over time. And so the age extensions of the norms may be upward or downward. It is necessary for a test. 6 is the reliability or the validity of the test, as well as the effectiveness of the individual test items can be significantly improved by doing a revision. The last is the theory on which the test was originally based has been improved significantly, and these changes should be reflected in design and context of the test. So, in the test construction phase, the proposed changes are made. Test tryout item analysis and test revision, in the sense of making a final refinements, follow. All this sound relatively easy and straightforward, but creating a revised edition of an existing test can be the most ambitious undertaking. Isa na sa kaya siya. A key step in the development of all tests, brand new or revised editions, is cross-validation. So, the next we will discuss the important process as we are more recent trend in the test publishing for co-validation. For the next slide. The term cross-validation refers to the re-validations of a test and examples of test takers other than those on whom test performance was originally found to be valid predictor of some criterion. So, in the articles discussing cross-validations of tests are often published in scholarly journals. For example, in our book provided a detailed account of the cross-validations of an instrument used to screen for cognitive impairment in older adults. So we expect that the items selected for the final versions of the test will have smaller item validities when administered to a second sample of for the test takers. This is so because of the operations of the chance. The decrease in item validities were inevitably occurs after cross-validations of findings is referred to as a validity shrinkage. Shrinkage is expected and it's viewed as an integral to the test development process. So validity shrinkage is the decrease in items validity that inevitably occurs after cross-validations of findings. So not to be confused with the cross-validations, co-validations may be defined as a test validations process conducted in two or more tests using the same sample of test takers. For the co-validation naman, may be it defined as a test validation process conducted on two or more tests using the same sample of the test takers when used in conjunction with the creations of norms or the revisions of the existing norms. This process may be also referred as a co-norming. Kasi nag-revise naman din yung existing norms niya. So, it is a current trend among test publishers who publish more than one test designed for use with the same population is to co-validate or to co-norm test. Co-validations of a new test and revision of existing tests can be beneficial in a various way, such as to the test publisher because it is so economical. So the quality assurance during the test revisions, quality assurance in a re-standardizations of the WISC 4th or Whistler's Intelligence Scales for Children, the 4th edition. It was in part maintained by having two qualified scorers rescored each protocol collected during the national tryout and standardization stages of the test development. If there are discrepancies in scoring, the discrepancy were resolved by yet another scorer referred to as a resolver. Sila na mag-re-resolve ng mga such discrepancy sa mga na-score ng mga test developers. So, Another mechanisms for ensuring consistency in scoring is the Anchor protocol. Anchor protocol is a test protocol scored by a highly authoritative scorer that is designed as a model for scoring and as a mechanism for resolving scoring discrepancy. So discrepancy naman is between scoring in an anchor protocol and the scoring of another protocol is referred to as scoring drift. So a discrepancy between scoring is an anchor protocol and the scoring of another protocol is referred to as a scoring drift. Here's the last topic that I have to discuss, which talk about the use of the item response theory or the RRT in building and revising a test. In a previous chapter, we noted that the item response theory could be applied in the evaluation of the utility of tests and testing programs. Here, there are possible rules of item response theory and test constructions as well as some of its pros and cons to a classical test theory or CTT na mabasa din naman sila guys. Also, there are three of many possible applications of the IRT in building and revising tests that includes first, evaluating existing tests for a purpose of mapping test revision, in which this IRT information curves can help test developers to evaluate how well an individual item or the entire test are. Second, determining measurement equivalence across test taker population. One tool to help ensure that psychological tests having a same construct is being measured no matter what language the test is. The IRT do the job, which is to translate those English language to Spanish one. The third one is developing an item banks. Developing an item banks is not simply a matter of collecting a large number of items. Typically, each of the items assembled as part of the item bank, whether taken from an existing test or a written one. The first is that the interviewer conducts one-on-one interviews with respondents in an effort to identify any doubt meaning or some statement which has the other meaning that associated with the items and a job to eliminate those one. The next step is creating the item bank is the administration of all the questionnaire items to a large representative samples of a target population. The questionnaire may be administered individually using paper and pencil methods. The final item bank will consist of a large set of items all measuring a single trait or ability of an individual. So a test developer may then use the banked items to create one or more tests with a fixed number of items. For example, a teacher may create two different versions of a math test in order to minimize efforts by test takers to cheat. The item bank can also be used for purposes of computerized adapting testing. So, that's the end of our report that talks about the test development. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.